This piece discusses suicide and suicidal ideation, and some people might find it disturbing. If you or someone you know is suicidal, please contact your physician, go to your local ER, or call the Suicide Prevention Hotline, 988.
The manor clung to the shoal, its silhouette a jagged claw against the twilight sky. Below, the sea gnawed at the cliffs, a churning graveyard of souls lost to its icy grip. Silently, the manor had bore witness to it all. Its now weathered facade, grey and peeling like sunburnt skin, whispered tales of its troubled past. A past that began with the suicide of its original owner, Captain Elliot Blackwell. A true man of the sea, Blackwell had spent the late 19th century navigating treacherous waters. As a master of his craft, he inspired confidence and loyalty from his crew in equal measure, which is why it was such a shock for them to find him, swaying gently, eyes bulging, his face a grotesque mask of horror. It wasn't the noose that killed him, the townsfolk later whispered, their voices hushed with fear. Must have been the horror he saw in his final moments. The truth, however, was far simpler. The advancements of the maritime industry that had ushered in the 20th century had overwhelmed him, and he understood with certainty that his world was fading into obsolescence. Yet, as is often the case with the truth, over the years it was drowned out by local whispers, weaving a tapestry of lies, transforming the once beautiful manor into a dark, foreboding tomb. Over the years, the manor housed many families, each arriving with hopes of a fresh start by the sea, but a constant undercurrent clung beneath the surface of their lives. An unseen chill seemed to follow them, an ever-present reminder of the manor's past. Sensitive children would speak of darting shadows and eerie laughter in vacant rooms, doors slammed by an invisible hand. The manor, it seemed, had a life of its own, a dark, pulsating heart hidden within its walls. In the sweltering summer of 1975, a young girl named Eleanor came to live at the manor. She was a bright and sensitive girl and was both terrified and fascinated by the manor's stories. One afternoon while exploring the attic, she stumbled upon a strange object hidden within a stack of old newspapers. A Ouija board and a wooden planchette, shaped like a hand with a single pointed finger. Although Eleanor had never seen a Ouija board, she recognized the name from one of her mother's stories about a seance party she'd attended, where guests had summoned spirits. Intrigued, Eleanor snuck the board into her bedroom, eager to show her friends when they came to visit. When they were together next, the girls sat in a circle around the Ouija board, the air thick with anticipation. At first, the planchette moved with agonizing slowness, hesitant, as if testing the waters. But as the girls focused their energy with youthful curiosity, it began to glide across the board with increasing speed, spelling out words and answering their questions in a chillingly detached voice. The answers were cryptic at first, veiled in riddles and ominous warnings, but as the session continued, the messages became clearer, more sinister. Shadows licked the walls and the room became dark. Eleanor squeezed her eyes shut as tight as she could. The saliva in her mouth was too thick to swallow, and then she let out a whimper. When she finally opened her eyes, the room was quiet once again, and her friends were staring back at her. Eleanor marched the Ouija board back up to the attic, pried open a loose floorboard, and hastily buried it, vowing never to touch it again. Gradually, the darkness that clung to the manor began to subside, and life returned to normal for Eleanor, her friends, and her parents. Her friends moved on and quickly forgot about the Ouija board, but Eleanor couldn't forget. She heard the whispers in the back of her mind that told her they'd opened a door to a realm she couldn't fully close, and that door could swing open again at any moment. Years passed, and Eleanor grew up, leaving childish fancies behind. She married, had children of her own, and built a life filled with love and laughter. She never spoke of her experiences, and the manor seemed at peace. Her memories of the board stayed buried deep within her mind and the attic floorboards. One crisp fall day, Eleanor's grandchildren, Max and Lily, came to visit. They were bright, inquisitive children who loved exploring the manor and old remnants of their grandmother's life. The time had come for Eleanor to move into a retirement community, and they were going to help pack up for the move. While Eleanor made lunch, the kids rifled through boxes in the attic, sorting forgotten treasures and dusty clothes. Suddenly, Max felt a little rumble where he sat. Looking down, he spied a misaligned floorboard, and intrigued, he touched the floor and discovered it was cold. He lifted the floorboard up, and to his surprise, he saw a dust-covered board and a little wooden hand, shaped like a single pointed finger. "Lily, I found some kind of board game." His sister peered over, and together they wiped away the dust, revealing the word Ouija. Intrigued, the children began to trace the hand across the board. A jolt of energy surged through them, and it seemed the wooden hand sprung to life, its movement erratic. With a mixture of fear and exhilaration, they watched as the hand began to spell B-L-A-C-K. Suddenly, without warning, a terrifying clatter ran out through the attic as an old photograph of the manor smashed to the ground, sending the children screaming. Even from the kitchen, Eleanor heard the commotion, and a wave of ice-cold dread washed through her. And then she knew. Quickly she hurried towards the attic as the manor met with chaos. The air crackled with malevolent energy, a clash between the living and the dead. As she rounded corners, objects began to rattle and hiss. She threw open the door to the attic and immediately saw the board. Memory fragments swirled within her, and panic clawed at her throat, choking her. A gust of icy wind exploded the attic light, plunging them into darkness. Long, distorted shadows danced and writhed on the walls, and that's when she saw him. A ghostly apparition. Captain Elliot Blackwell. Max and Lily, now huddled behind their grandmother, trembled with fear. Blackwell's voice boomed through the manor. "You dare disturb my sleep again?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. Leave us be, Blackwell." Eleanor pinched her eyes shut so tightly they burned. "Grandma!" Lily cried, her voice choked with sobs. Eleanor knew she had to act fast and desperately searched her mind until a faint whisper echoed, "Goodbye." With a surge of adrenaline, Eleanor threw her eyes open and leapt towards the board. "Elliot Blackwell," her voice trembling but firm, "you do not belong here, Captain. This is no longer your realm. Leave us, and be at peace." The planchette stilled until ever so gently it slid down to the bottom of the board. "Goodbye." Eleanor suddenly felt weak. "Goodbye, Blackwell." Eleanor looked at her grandchildren, their faces pale. "It's over." Max and Lily slowly rose to their feet, their legs still shaking. "Oh, I think it's time for this board to find a new home, don't you?"
From the Ghost Next Door podcast. Should we take that again?
Yes.
This is Sally Chachich and Sarah Matson from the Ghost Next Door.
You just heard the story of the curse of the Ouija board, boards that can be found at the Morbitorium in Wales.
We would like to welcome Dave Roberts, who is the owner and curator at the Morbitorium in Pontywayn, Wales. Welcome, Dave.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm good. First of all, what is a Morbitorium, and what exciting curiosities can you find at this place?
The Morbitorium is my own private collection. I started it about 10 years ago, or it started as a shelf about 10 years ago. I've been collecting oddities and things like that pretty much all my life. I've been into this, weird oddity, occult kind of stuff since I was a teenager. Um, but it's grown rapidly over the last 10 years to fill my entire house. And yeah, you can find all sorts of stuff in here. There's lots of taxidermy, there's Ouija boards, there's medical devices, like lobotomy tools, things like that. Lots of occult stuff. If it interests me, it kind of fits in with the Morbitorium, and I'm happy to house it in my museum.
Great. And how do these objects find their way to you?
The Ouija boards, all the ones I've got on display, they've all been sent in to me. If you Google for how do I get rid of a Ouija board, I'm the first result that comes up generally. So people tend to find my page, my address is on there. Most of the time, people will email me beforehand and kind of say, "Oh, this is what's happening," and give me all the details about it, and I'll reply to everyone. Most of the time, you don't hear anything back. But occasionally, a small percentage of the time, people will then send me their boards with little handwritten notes. It's becoming more and more common these days for boards just to turn up out of the blue with no prior emails, no notes in there. I had one this morning actually, just a little A4 one. Unwrapped it. There was a little boxed up Ouija board, no information on it at all. So I don't know what the backstory is. But yeah, people are sending them to me from all over the world. I get quite a few from America, a couple from Europe, France and Germany, but it's UK mainly, followed fairly closely by America. So yeah, Ouija boards are sent in to me just because I appear to be the go-to website for that. A lot of the other stuff, I do get a few bits and bobs donated. I've had bits of taxidermy where somebody's grandparents have passed away and they just don't know what to do with it. A huge boar's head, so we can't really take this down the charity shop. So I've had stuff given to the museum like that. Other things I pick up from other collectors, and I've got a bit of a network of people now that we all know each other once you get into the oddities scene, and a lot of the stuff kind of does the rounds between us all, and eventually it will go back to its original owner. But it's nice for everyone to have a go, if you like, own it for a little while.
That's so fascinating. Have you ever said no to a piece?
Yes. I was offered a set of pajamas from Auschwitz a year or two ago now, which would have been absolutely fascinating. And it had all the documentation and the paperwork and everything. But it doesn't, stuff like that belongs in a proper museum. I think to have it in my museum, a museum of oddities, it becomes an oddity. And something like that, it needs a bit more respect than to be put next to a two-headed skeleton. Ooh, look at the weird, freaky thing. It needs a bit more reverence to it. So I have turned down a few things. Not that I wouldn't be interested in them, but I think from a kind of a more of an ethical point of view or a personal choice.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. With all these haunted objects, do people have hauntings or ghostly experiences when they visit your museum?
Yes, there is a particular area in the museum where if people are going to feel anything, they always feel it in the same place. Me and my friend first noticed it. This is going back about 6 months ago. We were stood in front of a particular cabinet looking at a few of the new artifacts, and we felt kind of like a heaviness in our stomach, like you were going over a humpback bridge, but sort of really drawn out, kind of pulling inside. Wasn't an unpleasant feeling, but it was very, very noticeable. And there's been a few things like that going on for a while now. If people do come into the shop and they do feel anything, they'll always point to the same corner where me and my friend were. And it's uncanny, the number of people that do feel it.
Wow, that is so very cool. Would you say that that is the most haunted experience that you've personally had in your museum, or are there other objects that give you the chills, or other spaces?
Yeah, there's been other stuff that's happened. I'm always a bit skeptical when it comes to feelings because they're quite subjective. It's you can't really go, oh, look at this feeling I've had, and you can't show anyone or kind of share it with anyone. Although when we did first feel the feeling, if that makes sense, my friend felt it first, and she said to me, "Oh, Dave, come and stand over here." So I stood exactly where she was, and she didn't tell me, what she'd experienced, but I had this kind of pulling feeling inside, and I said, "Oh, this is what's happened. This is what I'm feeling." And she went, "Yeah, that's exactly what I've got." Um, and it was very very noticeable. But as I say, feelings for me are a bit subjective, and I can't point to that as proof. But the following day, I was doing all the washing up, put away the mugs and the teaspoons and everything, and I put away 3 teaspoons in my cupboard. And then about an hour or so later, I was out in the shop and I heard a clinking noise. And over in the sink, there was a teaspoon in there, and definitely hadn't been in there 10 minutes before because I'd just been wiping down some surfaces. That's strange. Put the teaspoon, went to put it back in the cupboard, and there was only two left on the shelf. So one of them, the third one, had suddenly, I definitely put it away, and all of a sudden it was back in the sink again. So I obviously hadn't washed it up, to the spirit's satisfaction. But that was quite a strange one because that was a physical thing. And I couldn't ignore that, or I couldn't say, well, that was in my head, because I could see the spoon in the sink. I didn't see it move, but I know where it was and I know where it ended up.
Mm.
And we've had things like books coming off shelves and packets of herbs coming off, the display spikes and things, but nothing that I found to be negative. It's always felt quite warm and cozy in here.
That's an interesting way to describe a morbitorium, warm
Yeah.
and cozy.
Yes. Obviously, the ghosts are happy with your museum.
Yeah, I think so. Well, we did have a while ago. I had a shrunken head come into the museum. Not a real human one. I don't have any sort of human tribal stuff in here. But it's a very very good tourist one. It's quite an old tourist head. And for the first week, maybe 10 days that it was here, I'd hear stuff like proper crash into the floor, glass breaking, just horrendous noises going on from the other room. So I go running into the room thinking, what have the cats done now? What have they knocked over? And absolutely nothing was out of place. And then, half an hour later, I'd hear the same noise or a similar noise coming from a different room. So I go legging it in there. Again, nothing out of place. And this happened for about 7, 8, maybe 9 days. And it gradually, it was more and more infrequent, and the noises were getting quieter. So the only thing that had changed was this shrunken head, as a new addition. So I like to think that it was the head sort of, waking up and going, where the hell am I? And, sort of kicking off a little bit. But then over a week going, oh yeah, I could live here, and it kind of settling into it.
I'm curious, do you have a favorite object?
It changes on a fairly regular basis, to be honest. There's a few bits which I would never get rid of. I've got a taxidermy peacock, which, when you look at it, it's definitely got a thyroid problem. It's like they've taken a dodo's body and covered it in peacock feathers. So it's a really, really odd shaped thing, but it's a one-off. There isn't another one of those on the planet. So I love him to bits. He looks a bit derpy, but he's brilliant. So he fits in perfectly. I've got a mummified cat. I've had a few over the years, but the one I've got now was a genuine, found under the floorboards of an old, sort of Tudor house. I know is a really old one, so that's staying here as well.
It definitely sounds like you have a lot of fascinating objects. Mm. So our haunting story focused on Ouija boards and the accompanying letters that has been
Yeah,
donated to your collection. So can you tell us a bit more about these Ouija boards?
I think the last count I was approaching 100. A lot of them sort of duplicates. There's the Parker Brothers 1970s Ouija board is a very, very common one. I've got loads of those. But they come in all different shapes and sizes. There's some glow in the dark ones. I've got a Scooby Doo one, a Barbie one. There's so many different varieties. My personal favourite is the Waddingtons or Parker Brothers traditional one, the one you see in all the horror films. It's Hasbro that have the license for that now. But yeah, that's my absolute favourite one. But the ones I've got on the wall, they're all unique ones or interesting looking ones. I don't have letters with all of them, as I said earlier. Sometimes they just turn up just in the post. I had one a couple of years ago that had obviously been tried to be burnt, um, and that was sent through the post, no information at all. And it was kind of like, oh, I'd really like to know the story of this one. What am I letting into my house?
Yeah, and it was interesting that you mentioned that you do have a Scooby Doo and a Barbie one, because I think a
Yeah,
lot of people may not know that these were created as toys.
Ouija boards came about in the late 1800s, kind of, I think 1881 was the very first one. And it was all born out of the spiritualist movement, which was really, really big in America. I've been looking at the different boxes of the ones I've had coming in, and it was in the 1970s where you first noticed the ages 7 to 70 kind of wording on the box. Prior to that, there was no information or no age guidance on there at all. Um, but yeah, you can get my first Ouija board. I've seen those. I've seen ones properly aimed at kids, and the number of families that come in with, I had sort of like 10, 11-year olds, and they're like, oh, can we get a Ouija board? Can we get a Ouija board? And just so they're so used to seeing them because of horror films that they don't. Some people are absolutely terrified of them. Don't get me wrong, but other kids are like, oh yeah, let's do a Ouija board. I think possibly without really being aware of the possible implications on it. But yeah, it is quite strange how some of them are definitely targeted at children.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thought, because it does seem that people have fairly extreme reactions to Ouija. They're either very
Mm.
intrigued or they're scared. Why do you think it is that Ouija boards have inspired such diversive responses?
I usually say that Hollywood has a lot to answer for, and it is mainly Hollywood that kind of feeds into that fear. The Exorcist was, I think, prior to The Exorcist, interest in Ouija boards and spiritualism had kind of died off quite a lot, other than in certain circles where it's always been of interest. But then The Exorcist came out in the 70s, and people are interested in it again. And it's like a snowball. It just kind of grew and grew, and the more you saw Ouija boards on films being scary, the more they were included in future horror films. To my mind, it's no different to a deck of tarot cards or a pendulum. It's just a tool which you can communicate with, uh, whether you think it's your subconscious, the universe, spirits, whatever it may be. It's the equipment to do it. I always say, if somebody comes in, oh, I couldn't have one of those in my house, they're evil. I always say, well, at what point did it become evil? Was it when the Scooby Doo sticker was attached to the bit of wood? It's what makes that evil,
Mm.
But I've heard so many corroborating stories of people, people using a kind of a homemade Ouija board with bits of ripped up paper and maybe an upturned shot glass as the pointer. And the number of times I've heard people say, "Oh, yeah," and the glass shot across the room and smashed on the wall. I can understand, if something like that happens to you, you are going to be absolutely terrified and not want one in the house. But I don't know, I'm very skeptical about stuff like that.
So I heard this really interesting story, I guess, theory, and we had sort of hinted at it in the story, which is that if you don't close down your seance session in a way that satisfies the ghosts, you leave a portal open from yourself to the Ouija board to let anything in. Do you think that's a Hollywood inspired fantasism, or is potentially truth to it?
The Goodbye has been on a Ouija board since its first inception. So it was obviously intended to be used and closed down at the end of a session. And I would always recommend, going to Goodbye afterwards, follow the rules. I've heard that sort of leaving a portal open is quite a common thing for people to believe. And I've got no proof one way or the other. It certainly doesn't hurt to go to Goodbye once you finish using one. So, don't tempt fate, don't poke the bear,
Yes.
It's like a regular conversation, I guess. It's always nice to
Yeah,
have a closure to
yeah,
the conversation.
yeah.
Have you ever used a board to communicate with spirits?
Yes, I did recently actually. We did a couple of seance evenings and paranormal investigations here running up to Halloween, sort of last week. We tried lots of different things whilst we were here. We was kind of open to small groups. One of the things we did, only on one session, was the Ouija board, and it did move around. It kind of gave us semi-intelligent answers for ages and things like that. But it wasn't the best sort of evidence that we had. We were doing other things like we had an automatic writing planchette, which is very much like a Ouija board planchette, slightly bigger, two wheels on the back, a pencil in the front. So you do it on a bit of paper, and it moves around in the same way that a Ouija planchette would on a board. But instead of spelling stuff out, it drags the pencil around, makes little squiggly shapes, and you need to interpret that afterwards. And we had quite a few interesting results with that. We were doing glass tipping just for simple yes or no questions. We were doing EMFs and things like that. And we tended to have better results with the non-Ouija board methods. Um, it did move. It certainly wasn't spelling anything particularly exciting or recognizable. But when we were asking for ages, it did go down to 6 because we thought we were communicating with a young girl called Sally at the time. So it was quite interesting, but not as conclusive as it could be in my head.
That is so interesting because I have to say, since we started working on this episode, a few strange things have happened to me.
Yeah.
And
It's not my fault. It's not my fault.
it's just another weird coincidence that you communicated with a Sally and I am a Sally and I had weird experiences. I would love to know what the pen said.
The first night, it was very kind of low light when we were doing it, and we could sort of make out like a head wearing a peaked cap, a newsboy on a flat cap kind of thing. And my son happened to be joining us for that. My son dresses a lot better than me. He was wearing his flat cap at the time, and we were there going, "Oh my God, here's a flat cap!" And with my son, and there was a few other things as well. The spirit box brought up the word banjo, and my son also plays the banjo. And so we tried a few other lines of questioning, and we think we were talking to somebody that was related to us in the past. But in the morning, then, when we were looking at slightly better light, I took a photo of what the planchette had drawn, put it through Photoshop just to change the contrast and make the pencil line stand out a little bit more. And what I saw, instead of a man's head wearing a peaked cap, it looked like there was a much more of a kind of a flowing dress to it, and it looked like a lady holding a baby, a sort of a swaddled baby, with almost like a mob cap rather than a flat cap on it, and that was quite weird. It didn't really tie in with any of the answers we were getting through the sounds, but it was, once I'd kind of highlighted the lines, it was, oh, that's unmistakably a woman with a long flowing dress holding a child.
How often do you do these kind of workshops?
That was the first time we'd done them, actually. It was something which I've had in the back of my mind for a while, but with the activity kind of increasing a little bit more here over the last maybe 5 or 6 months, it kind of pushed that thought a bit a bit more towards the front of my brain. And then it's Halloween, the time where the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest. So what better time to do it?
Yeah, do you think that it's possible that some of the objects in your museum were connected to people on the other side that wanted to connect with you guys?
I've certainly got things here which, I've got a couple of African, they're called Eden staffs, and they should be buried with the person who owns them. Each person gets their own unique set. And obviously, I've got a set in my display cabinet. So either this person isn't dead and they've been parted with them, or they are dead and they've been parted with them. Funnily enough, they were the object we were stood in front of when we had that weird kind of pulling feeling on our stomachs. We've assumed that it's that which is kind of the start of all of the activity here.
Well, this was super fascinating, Dave. We're so happy that you could join us and tell us about your Morbitorium and the Ouija boards that you have there. 100. That's quite the number.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's getting up there now. Yeah.
Well, we hope that some of our listeners will get a chance to go in and visit you in Pontywayn and see some of your incredible collection in person.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Thank you so much for speaking to me.
Thank you for listening to The Ghost Next Door. This was episode 2 of season 2, The Curse of the Ouija Board, performed by Sally Tutchich. This story is a creative reimagining inspired by the haunted Ouija boards located at the Morbitorium in Pontywayn, Wales, written by Sally Tutchich.
This episode features an interview with David Roberts, who is the owner and curator of the Morbitorium Museum of Oddities and Curiosities in Pontywayn, Wales. You can find us on YouTube and all your favorite podcast platforms. Please support us by subscribing and following us on social media at Ghost Next Door Podcast. Our next ghostly episode will be released in December 2024.